Okay. All right, we might get started right on 5 o'clock, and for the next 35 minutes, have a bit of a sharing from my side anyway, about grammar in context and thinking about text level. As before, we'll be recording. I'm recording this so that you can head back to YouTube and watch again later, which is probably more convenient for a lot of people. But thank you to those of you who are here. You give me a starting point to do some conversation as well. If you haven't been here before, to introduce myself quickly, I'm Kylie Bradfield, and I'm from Australia originally, but I work here in Scotland at the University of Stirling, and I teach pre-service teachers all about teaching English. It's an absolute passion, and one of those areas of passion is grammar. I just think it is the most interesting thing in the world, which is I try to spread like a virus to my students as well. So over the past 2 weeks, I've talked about grammar at word level, grammar at sentence level, and today text level. And in a way, we probably could have started with this because it's the big picture. So all of the work we've done looking at the steps to teaching grammar in context really come alive when you have a text that you want to teach in your classroom. And of course, all writing should be taught through reading as well as the writing itself. So I'm going to try to blend the idea of scaffolding writing at the text level with bringing in the types of teaching of grammar that we've been talking about in the past few weeks. If you weren't here for those other ones, you could track back through Twitter and you'll find links to those on YouTube, so you can do a bit of a catch up. Okay, so what does it mean at text level? Let's have a look. Oh, that's just what I've said. We're here now at number 3. Who would have thought all those weeks ago? Okay. Basically, the premise behind this is my seeing, particularly my pre-service teachers being extremely anxious about the teaching of grammar and thinking about this in a way that's very traditional with exercises and worksheets and textbooks. So when we think about working with grammar contextually, what we're thinking about is blending it in with the type of text that we're reading and that we're writing. So we include lots of quality literature. Let's take the worksheets and the exercises and replace them with quality literature that you have written, that your students have written, that authors have written. You need to become a real writer in this equation. We also have to remember that it's reading and writing that are part of learning grammar. Knowing grammar as a reader can help you to be more critical in the thinking that you're doing. For example, I always ask my students to look at the adjectives that have been given to particular places or people. Adjectives can be broken down into a lot of different types. You might not have heard this. When I was taught grammar at school, an adjective was a describing word. It described what a noun looked like. But adjectives can be evaluative, they can be factual, and they can be comparative. And when we are being pushed to believe something, authors will often choose the evaluative adjectives, the ones that are about opinion, that are going to give us a view that is not necessarily factual. For example, my mother would describe frogs as horrible, whereas I would describe them as magnificent. So these are evaluative adjectives. So we need it in reading, but we can also then use it in our writing. The other thing that we need to remember is that scaffolding is as important as anything. We would never say to a student who was learning to swim, we would never push them in the deep end of the pool and say, learn while you're trying to survive. We would take them in with floaties, and then we would let them do some work while holding onto the side, and so on and so on. So it's all about scaffolding in everything that's to do with literacy. And the other thing is we have to get clever, in Scotland particularly, of reading between the lines in the CFE, because it's not clear what we should be teaching. Hopefully today will help. All right, so text level. In text level, we still continue to think about the 4 steps, the REDM model that Reedy and Byrne developed, which is really just a scaffold, beautifully scaffolded, but a nice way to think about step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 when you're teaching anything, particularly grammar. So inside teaching a particular text, we want to remember that we're going to take the students through these steps, that at some point in relation to whatever text we are teaching, we are going to do reading and investigation. We are going to do explicit teaching of that particular grammatical concept. We are going to let them talk about it. We're going to talk to them about it. And we're going to let them experiment, make mistakes, fix errors that we've made ourselves, fix their peers' errors. And then to use that in some really kind of managed writing experiences before we allow them to have some autonomy in that writing. Now, as each week I've been giving you a bit of an example, I'm going to do that again today. And I'm actually retelling something that I've used in classrooms. I've used this for as low as primary 3, and I was once given the opportunity to do this with a year 10 class. I don't know what that would be in Scotland, kind of mid high school, so I'm not sure where that would sit. So what I would do, I would set up a mock email account or a picture of my email. And while the students were busy doing their morning routine, I would say to them, I just have to check my email. And a number of the students would sort of look at you strangely, like, why are you telling me this? What does it matter? And of course, I'd pull the mock email up onto the front screen and then make a big deal of getting this email from a friend who was working in America and had decided to become a cat herder. A cat herder, you heard me right. And then I would play them a video. Now, in chat, you'll see that I've given you a link to that video. So could I ask you, if you haven't seen it before, could I get you to watch it once or twice? It's about 1 minute long. While you watch it, I want you to imagine what it would be like to be a cat herder. Okay, so off you go to watch that on YouTube and come back in a few minutes. Watch it twice. Okay. Let's see what's going on here. Chat, okay, it should be. Yeah. We'll put it in chat again. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that. Could someone let me know in Zoom, you can let me know in the chat that you're back? Okay. Okay, terrific. All right. Thank you. You can probably imagine that that was a fairly kind of motivating or engaging video to show. And as I said, I've worked with older secondary students and very young students on this. I chose this when I needed to get them writing imaginative recounts. Okay, so of course, this viewing of the cat herding video would happen a number of times throughout the lessons or the units that we were doing. But the key came back to me needing to teach them about recounts. And in this case, I was doing imaginative recounts, which are things like journals that you might write from the point of view of a character. The orientation is usually the scene setting up when it says who, where, when, sometimes how. You know, on Tuesday, my class went to the zoo by bus. So that's our very big opening broad statement for a recount. We then have a chronological series of events that occur. And generally we're talking about this in first person. I did this, I did that. We might have some kind of event that happens. And then there's a reorientation at the end, and usually includes some kind of personal evaluation on the event or the day. You know, at 3 o'clock, we returned to school on the bus. Everybody had a fantastic day. So this is something that I would teach in that beginning period when we're talking about what way we would structure a recount, and particularly an imaginative recount being something that hasn't necessarily happened to us. The intention for an imaginative recount, of course, is to entertain. Thinking about what we would do as we go through this is to, first of all, have identified for yourself what types of language features. Language features is another term that kind of means the grammar of a particular text. So what sorts of language features are my students going to have to do in order to show that they can create an effective imaginary recount? Well, I find this by going to one of the millions of online sources. And one of the things you can do is use the Google search text types, generic outlines, all of these sorts of things. This is all free and available because it's not owned by anyone. You know, this stuff comes from what we know about genres. You don't need to buy a program to get this. I have put a link on Twitter to one school's version of this. You'll notice that they all start looking the same. It's because they've come from an original source. But anyway, I know that my students have to write in past tense. Okay, so I'm going to have to ensure that throughout my lessons, I'm going to have lessons about using past tense. I know that I'm going to have a lesson on connectives. Sometimes these are about the cohesion of the text and how it hangs together. And in a recount, we see things that are temporal. We use words like then, first, next, afterwards, meanwhile. And that we think about the purpose being to recount from a particular individual, but you also might have larger groups of participants who aren't just that individual. So inside of this, I might decide that my students need some work on adjectives. They need to be able to describe the things in general better, maybe with the use of factual and evaluative and comparative adjectives. So I've identified right from the beginning the types of things that I need to teach based on the text. This is what we don't get from the CFE. So this is where you need to work with your school to decide what types of texts are being focused upon in your year or in your area, and then identify what sorts of language features and grammatical concepts go with it. Okay. So the curriculum cycle, it's known as the curriculum cycle. You might have also heard about it being the writing cycle. Again, nobody owns this stuff. It's about frameworking and scaffolding learning. So you don't need to go anywhere to buy a program. Generally, it follows these 5 steps. The first step is probably the most important, and yet it's skipped really quickly over by a lot of teachers. Building the field means giving children the knowledge that they need in order to do the task you've set them, like the writing about cat herding in my case. So to build the field, I have to get them to look at lots of recounts, lots of work around the descriptions of characters, places, settings, but also I have to give them the knowledge that they need about the particular event or thing they're writing about. So in that building the field, we're going to do work around how do cats behave? What do we know about cats already? What are our suspicions about how they behave? And what particularly do we see them doing in the cat video that allows us to gather information about being a cat herder? So that's the really important build-up. We then follow the normal scaffolding process for writing that shouldn't be skipped. Sometime you are going to be the modeler, the writer, and all of the work that we've been looking at over the last few weeks around grammar should come in here, where you are modeling, sharing, guiding, and allowing the students to have their own chance to do it. So it's almost like the grammatical scaffolding fits inside the writing or curriculum cycle. So it's a really kind of double layered event that's happening here. We can't just focus on the structure of the recount. We have to embed the work around grammar and tense and great interesting participants, or with the adjectives that we've been talking about, and the time, the temporal connectors. So in the model writing, I'm going to model using the different tenses, or I'm going to model using some temporal words to begin my sentences. But I'm also modeling the different structure, the components of it. Many people that I have seen, and many teachers, think that when they get to the independent writing, it's kind of a process like Go. And to me, there's another added layer here. The writing process, which we hear about all the time, came about in the 80s and 90s. And this is because they realized that it was a good way to teach children to become writers was to kind of enact what real writers do out in the real world. So the writing process, which includes planning, drafting, editing, proofreading, and then finally publishing, is only one small element of the whole cycle. I see many teachers who go from introducing something to the writing process and skipping modelling, sharing, guiding all the way through, and then wondering why their students aren't writing a recount properly. So we think about the scaffold on the big side, which is the writing cycle, and then ensuring that at the end, in that independent stage, the children are given the experience to act like writers themselves and not just thinking that they can do it without knowing. And inside of that is another layer where we add the grammatical content, where we add the information about the generic structure. So it's highly complicated, isn't it? The things I like to do and have done with, in particular, this example that I'm giving, is right at the beginning, sparking their interest. So the use of my friend who's in America and who is learning to be a cat herder, and then the watching of the video helps to spark an interest. I went into one teacher's classroom. She had a group of students who were very reluctant writers. She could barely get half a page out of them. Can you imagine what happened when I went in with my cat herder story? we were writing pages and pages, and she couldn't believe that a simple kind of spark could get them writing. The other thing is to make sure in all of those steps, from building the field, modeling, sharing, guiding, and independent, that you are talking, that they are talking. Talk, talk, talk. In every kind of area, we know that our oral language is the foundation for reading, the foundation for writing. And allowing children to talk about what they're writing or what they're planning will get you better results. The other thing is to give yourself a pat on the back for all the connections you can make to other literacy elements. When you're teaching about one particular genre, you're also teaching about vocabulary. You know, imagine the types of words you're going to need to describe cats, and how cats move, and how cats act, and how cats feel. And what about of course, the herders? What sorts of things are they going to be thinking, doing, feeling, and so on, which I'll show you in a minute. But it's also about what you can learn comprehension-wise from watching a video like this. There are elements of visual, just in thinking about what colours are used in that video. Why don't we see primary colours everywhere? Right? Why do we see this information about the spatial elements of that video? Why do we see the silhouette of horses against the mountains? What does that tell us? What are we trying to be told? And so many little hidden gems inside the video. If you watch again and again, you'll see beautiful things like someone rolling up wool, someone sneezing, someone using a lint roller on their coat. Beautiful little things that they can see, which means they need to use it over and over again. And you can even talk about the words that are used and the audio. You know, the first boy that says, you know, this is my great grandfather, he was the first herder in the family. So what sorts of elements of that boy's life can we bring into understanding why might he be a cat herder, for example? It gives such a stepping point. So what I would start off with doing is gathering all of the background knowledge about cats. What do you know about cats? But also, what do you know about herding? What do you know about living on the land? We call them jackaroos and jillaroos here back in Australia. So what would we call them? What would they say when they introduce themselves to somebody? You can use freeze frames for this, which I think we spoke about last week. So repeating some of the scenes that they see in the video, and then asking, I use the tap-in technique. A tap on the shoulder means that you're going to say what your character might be thinking or feeling or about to say. You can change that around for however you like. Hot seats are great. So if you can get in character, you know, Sally, I want you to sit in the hot seat, and today you're going to be one of the most annoying cats in the herd. Okay, and for today you can speak. We're going to ask you questions, and you must answer in role as the most annoying cat, perhaps the one who climbed the tree to get away. We might annotate the images, you know, snapshot some images. If you've got any kind of software that means that you can write on those, a terrific way to think about what's happening. Another one that I really love, and I love this for every piece of writing that is on the sort of narrative side of things. You might have heard of a Y chart, where you write down what you see, hear, and feel about a particular event or thing. I change that into an X chart because I want to have a moves like or a smells like added in. Okay, so one of the things that I would get the students to do is to have the video and watch as many times as they like with a partner, and write down as many things that they can see, that what they would hear, how they could see the characters moving, and what it might sound like. Okay, for the cat one, you might also like to add in smells like, which always makes them laugh. This is about setting up the foundation for writing. In reality, 70% of your writing time, or the writing time that they're going to be doing, should be in this preparation. It should be about getting ready to write. And then they should, in that last bit, have all of the equipment they need to be able to write. So then I get them onto the purpose. You know, the purpose here is for us to write an imaginative recount about what it would be like to be a cat herder for the day. So we talk about recounts here. We learn about the generic structure, and here I begin bringing in elements of the grammar, about the tense and the cohesive ties, and the adjectives, if that's what I want to do. It's taught through then those model guided and shared steps. Always, I think, important to have an audience. So if you can find someone who wants to read these, whether it be that you create a class book that's then placed in the library, or that you share them on the class website, I think it's really important to have somebody looking at them. And again, as I said, we go through and we scaffold again those elements of tense or adjectives or whatever it is that you want to do. And then at last, coming to this independent stage where we let them plan, draft, edit, proofread and publish. We don't always have to publish everything that's written. Sometimes them being in the writing notepad is enough, but something like this you might decide to publish. And then, of course, we're looking for the demonstration of the elements that we identified before. You know, do they have an orientation? Is there an account of events that are in order, or have they used other literary tools like flashbacks and things like that with the reorientation? All of these things and the grammatical features we talked about before, all of these then feed, I'm going to skip that one, towards assessing, went too far. Go towards assessing the work that's been presented. Okay, so as before with others times we've talked about this, when you're looking through the modelling, you might use observations and checklists. But in writing, we should always use conferencing as well. So checking in with the students in each stage to see how their performance is going. And you will be checking for things on a checklist like, have they got the orientation? Are the events in sequence? Is there some kind of evaluative comment on the end? And have they used evaluative adjectives? Have they used past tense and so on? And that will help you to make a judgment summatively on their writing choices. Okay, as I said here, you might assess them in the modelled, the shared and guided and independent before coming to that focused analysis right at the end of their last piece of writing. The other thing about writing that I think we don't do enough of is peer assessment or peer feedback. So in all stages, allowing them to share their work with others is incredibly important. So it's a very highly complicated task to teach at text level. And remember that all of those underlying kinds of grammatical elements need to be embedded in that cycle. If the idea of the cat herders appeals to you and you've got children at your fingertips, I'm happy to be an audience. If you write about cat herding and you need someone to read them, I would absolutely love to do that. So please think of me. Are there any questions about that in general, the writing cycle and the ideas of teaching grammar inside that text level? Does anyone have any questions? Just check, I'll get rid of that. If not, you can contact me via Twitter at any time. Send me a message if you would like to. If you Google my name, you'll find my email address at the university, and I'd be happy to hear from you there. The last thing I would want to say that for you to think about, and perhaps you can let me know. Great, yeah, anytime, it's good to hear from you. I would like to start doing some perhaps kind of like 5 to 10 minute shots on my YouTube channel. But there are some other bigger, larger kind of ideas that are constantly sort of coming to mind. And these are things like using multicultural literature, perhaps learning the grammatical concepts themselves. You know, when I talk about adjectives, if you're not confident about those 3 different types, would you like to learn about those? Would you like to learn about cohesion? Would you like to learn more about functional grammar, or teaching vocabulary, or reading comprehension. So I'd love it if you have a think about some of the things that you think your crew needs at your school, and let me know, and I'll be very happy to put something together for you. The handout, again, you can get from Twitter. Just let me know if you have any difficulty getting that. And thank you for listening today. I'll stick around for a few minutes if you've got any questions.
Thank you again, Kaylee. That was really useful.
You're most welcome. I'm glad. I'm really hoping that it's of some use.